number one.
Hi, and welcome to the Arlington County Board recess meeting that's going to begin in just a few moments. But first, I'm going to walk you through how it all works. This meeting is usually held on a Tuesday and continues Saturday's regular meeting, held every month except August. The meeting begins at 3 p.m., sometimes with awards and recognitions, followed by reports from individual board members. The board then may make appointments to advisory commissions before board members give regional reports. County board members represent Arlington on regional bodies dealing with transportation, governance, and other issues that affect the entire region. They report back to their colleagues on the work of those regional groups. The afternoon session ends with the county manager's report to the board. The board then takes a break. Often during the break, the board will hold a closed session. Because the meeting is closed to the public, the board may discuss only items permitted by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. These may include, among other matters, personnel issues, lawsuits, other legal or real estate matters. The board resumes its public meeting no earlier than 6:30 p.m. The evening session begins with a public hearing on each of the items carried over from Saturday's meeting. The board may hear from staff, commissions, the applicant, and the public before discussing the item among themselves and voting. No earlier than 6:45 p.m., the board will consider its regular hearing items. The board may again hear from staff, commissions, the applicant, and the public before discussing the items among themselves and voting. But here's a glance at today's agenda before the meeting begins.
And we do have hearing assistive devices for those who are hearing impaired. If you do need any other accommodations to participate in today's meeting, please check with our clerk, Ms. Jacobs, who is seated to my right. We will have our afternoon we will have a series of reports from both the board and the manager before beginning with our evening agenda, which has a number of items, two of which were pulled from the consent agenda on Saturday and will be considered first, along with several other regular hearing items. I will note that for the record, Mr. Gutschall, Vice Chair Garvey, Chair Dorsey, Member Crystal, and Member DeFerranti are all present and accounted for. Good to see you all. And why don't we go ahead and begin with today with a proclamation, as is our custom. And it is my pleasure to introduce into the record a proclamation, commemorating Small Business Saturday. It reads as follows. Whereas there are currently 30.7 million small businesses in the United States, representing 99.7% of all firms with paid employees in the U.S., which are responsible for 65% of net new jobs created between 2000 and 2018, and whereas 94% of consumers in the United States agree that small businesses contribute positively to the local and national communities by supplying jobs and generating tax revenue, and 89% agree that it is important for people to support the small businesses they value in the community, whereas 96% of consumers who plan to shop on Small Business Saturday said the day inspires them to go small, to independently own retailers or restaurants that they have not been to before and would not have otherwise tried. And whereas since 2002, Arlington has supported over 53,000 small business enterprises through its entrepreneurial program BizLaunch, which created approximately 172,000 jobs. with BizLaunch and BizLaunch en Español, dedicated to supporting over 5,000 businesses each year by developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And whereas Arlington is comprised of 189 certified small, women-owned and minority-owned businesses, it is committed to working with diverse businesses equally throughout the county and supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our neighborhoods. Therefore, I, Christian Dorsey, Chair of the County Board of Arlington, Virginia, do hereby proclaim this upcoming November 30th, 2019 as Small Business Saturday and urge the residents of our community to support their local small businesses and merchants on this Saturday and, of course, throughout the year. Is there anyone here to receive that proclamation today, or is this just something we're entering into the record? All right, beautiful, beautiful. Small businesses are working indeed. That's right, that's true, you are. We'll do the ceremonial handoff, but no, you don't get to keep it. All right. So we now have time for board member reports, and I will just verbally go through a few items that were on my calendar over this past month since we last met. Many of us were in attendance at the grand opening ribbon cutting of Gilliam Place, a project that the county, through its Affordable Housing Investment Fund, partnered with the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, APA, to create in Columbia Pike, near the corner of Glebe Road and Columbia Pike. It's an innovative project that's bringing a multitude of uses to a single site, including the preservation of what existed on the site before, the Arlington Presbyterian Church. They will have a place to continue their congregant fellowship in this new facility with a room on the ground floor. It also provides a wonderful entrepreneurial space for La Cocina, which will help develop and train people who are interested in a career in the culinary arts. And as part of this project, which takes advantage of the Columbia Pike Form-Based Code, there's also the preservation of some open space, which is adjacent to the site, which will be a place for reflection among residents and the congregants who are part of this mixed-use facility, but also an amenity open to the neighborhood. Similarly, we had, and I think many or all of you made it through at some point for the grand opening of the Harris, Teeter, and Centro Residences project, another form-based project, this one at the corner of George Mason Drive in Columbia Pike. This is one that's providing a number of amenities to the community, including of course, residences, a full-service grocery store, as well as other retail opportunities, and the property is nearly fully leased out, which is unusual when projects open. Usually there's a lag time between when the retail spaces are occupied, but in this case, they've been successful in attracting a number of retail tenants to the building in addition to the Harris Teeter. And there's also an outdoor space, which is different from many of the public plazas that exist as a part of residential communities in Arlington. There are a number of biophilic principles in play in which people can interact with nature outside in that public plaza. This month, I had the opportunity to take a look at the installation and the operations of an investment that this board made. I believe it was as part of last year's budget process. I may not be getting that exactly correct. But the Sheriff's Department identified a need in order to keep the facility secure and safe, and the residents, the detainees safe therein, for a body scanner machine, which would eliminate contraband or severely reduce the risk of contraband being brought into the facility. And I got a chance to take a look at how this machine actually operates. And very similar to what many of us who go through airports experience. You go through a giant machine that takes what is a very detailed scan, but one that is not invasive. I want to be very clear. It doesn't reveal any personal characteristics that would otherwise jeopardize people's privacy, but is quite successful in ensuring that contraband is not brought into the facility. And as we know, one of the precipitating incidents for seeking this kind of solution was someone who suffered an overdose after contraband was brought in. So this is a way to ensure the security of the facility and the health of everyone who is inside. We have, several of us, I believe, have participated in community conversations as part of our Housing Arlington initiative on the economics of housing and the environment and sustainability of housing, or the effects thereof. And then also I participated in one on housing and equity. And I find that these are very well received in our community. People like having an opportunity to get into an issue without there being a topic on the agenda that forces mobilize for and against, but to instead have a conversation with people about the perspectives and issues that inform our various approaches to our Housing Arlington initiative. So I highly recommend that people in our community who are interested in the subject, and more importantly, interested in how the county is approaching grappling with Housing Arlington and the opportunities and challenges that we face, to visit our Housing Arlington site and view those community conversations, which are archived for you to look at your convenience. Also, there was an event that I just wanted to quickly highlight that was convened by the Halls Hill Highview Park Civic Association, principally under the leadership of Wilma Jones Kilgo, someone who's become a historian of her neighborhood. And she convened an event that included a lot of people who grew up and had their formative years in the pre-integration era of Halls Hill to talk about their experiences growing up, as well as to reflect on how the county has changed since then. And, you know, not to make it all rose-colored, the story is not always good, at least from those first-hand perspectives. But that was also augmented by what was a unique multi-generational component to this program that included some youth who had learned about the history of segregation in Arlington by engaging in a project where they learned a little bit about music and got a chance to learn a craft by making their own guitars. But it was a wonderful way of bringing together multiple generations to learn about history and to understand our present. And I should note that the effort was supported by Virginia Humanities, which has made it a point to help assist Arlington in having these stories told and having our community learn from the firsthand experiences of others. And just one final note, I got a chance to join our counterpart in Alexandria, Mayor Justin Wilson and Councilmember Kanik Aguirre, at an event, Worldwide Remembrance Day, to spotlight pedestrian fatalities, on our roadways. And, you know, this is an annual event that has been spearheaded by a group that organized in Alexandria that is looking now as part of our Vision Zero initiative in Arlington to also bring together Arlingtonians who are interested in what we can all do together to reduce the risk that we face, that people face as pedestrians, as bicyclists, and as motorists due to careless, distracted behavior on the public rights of way. All right, so that's my report for the month. We'll now turn to colleagues, and we'll begin with Ms. Garvey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorsey, and I'm going to take us all on a trip. The last meeting, I was actually not here. I participated from overseas because I was in Aachen, Germany, our sister city. And I'll just take us all on a little trip there, if you will. So Aachen was the first major German city to fall to the Allies, and that's 75 years ago now. It was on October 21st, 1944, and it's a big deal anniversary for our friends in Aachen. The last time I was there, the mayor asked me personally, would I please come? And I could kind of see why when I was there. It was a big ceremony. I was the only American official there. And I was there with Hannah Un, our sister city's treasurer, and we quite possibly were the only Americans in the room. It was a very large, old room. They call it a Rathaus, which is kind of fun. That means City Hall in German, apparently. And it was quite an event. We started with, next slide, please. We started with archival footage from the Battle of Aachen as an American. I'll tell you, I was a little uncomfortable sitting there thinking, oh my heavens, here I am, the only American in the room, and we're about to watch archival footage of battling in Aachen. And happily, I was a little relieved. Right away, they started out showing us dropping leaflets on the city, warning residents and citizens to please leave, because there was going to be an invasion, and they didn't want they didn't want folks to get hurt that were not civilians to get hurt. The Battle of Aachen actually was quite long. It went from October 2nd to 21st. There was fierce house-to-house fighting and really high casualties on both sides. Most of the civilian population, however, had left the city. And as I say, it was a little strange to sit there and watch this archival footage and realize, rubble-strewn streets, fires and burning, and soldiers running around, and realize that my mother, whom I had just visited, was a teenager when this all was happening. So it really isn't that long ago, and there I was surrounded by Germans who really are now our friends. So that was really quite interesting. We had a speech, next one, slide. Then we heard from the Vice President of the German Parliament, Thomas Oppermann. When I was introduced to him, I said, I have to apologize, I'm not quite sure how you fit in. And he said, think of me as the Nancy Pelosi of the Bundestag. So I got him. He's an important guy. His speech was in German, which I do not understand much of, but I could catch the gist of his remarks, and it was a really moving speech. The crowd was really with him and inspired. And what he did is he looked at our present situation today through the lens of the past, which really all good history speeches do. And so Mr. Oppermann talked about how Americans not only came to liberate Aachen and Germany, but they stayed to help. And that the Germans still today are grateful for the help that the Americans provided them. He talked about President Franklin Roosevelt, who knew that leaders cannot think about who is first, but know that we're all together and everybody is important. He spoke of the importance of the European Union and the dangers of Brexit, and how we must not go back to the time of the Nazis. And then he very pointedly, which I did understand, even though it was in German, spoke about how leaders like Trump, Putin, and Erdogan don't take us forward, but take us back to those dark times, and we must not today live in fear. We must work to get together every day for cooperation and democracy, not go back where some people are trying to take us. And this got huge applause. And Mr. Oppermann looked at me to see how I was taking this. I gave him a slight smile and a nod of the head. Then there was a brief reception, next picture, opportunity for pictures. Here we are with some Sister Cities folks, the mayor of Aachen, and on the other side, Benjamin Devali from Reims, which is our other sister city. And then I got together, we had a meeting afterwards, next slide, and we went over some things that we were working on, and I went over our pilot on scooters, which I had sent our earlier report, and I brought the next one, and the mayor of Aachen said he was very pleased to have it. He's told, yeah, they can hold there, that's fine. And he was very happy to have that information. Reims was listening, the gentleman from Reims, and he said he wanted to have that too, so I'm going to send it to them. And we were really getting some international cooperation, which is cool. Aachen is moving forward with a circulator bus, driverless autonomous circulator bus, which I think we can all learn from. Finally, at the end, next slide there, I presented Mayor Philippe with a Jefferson Cup, which we have to commemorate the occasion, and it says October 21st, 1944 to 2019, peace and friendship, Arlington, Aachen. And he was very pleased to have his cup, and we have the little thing. So we've got our own copy here, and we had one there. Then I went on to Berlin to visit my family there and returned to meet with this company called Ubitricity. And they are working on piloting curbside electric vehicle charging. They have, next slide. They have 1,500 of these chargers working in London now, downtown London, and they either have just finished installing or almost finished putting 500 in New York City as a pilot. So I was really wanting to talk to them because I think this is something we could really learn from. Next slide. So I've connected the Ubitricity folks with our staff. And I'll just show, so this is a non-street light. This is just if you used a bollard to charge, and the idea is it's on the curbside, so when you park your car, you can plug it in and charge it. It's called trickle charging, so it's not like a blast that you get it all done quickly, but if the car is there while you're in the grocery store, you can get it charged up a little bit. Next one, next slide. And you can either pay on the bollard that's there, or the car itself carries it. So they're checking out different ways of paying. So in this one, it's interior of the car. You can see the machine in there that kind of that charges it. So it's all working out who pays for what. Next slide. And then street lights is one of the ways they do it. And as you can see, I've heard from our staff the sense that it would be too much to put on a street light, but here's one right here, and it's kind of an attractive street light, and it doesn't look like it's too big. So anyway, it may just be an exchange of information when Ubitricity our staff. But I think even that is really important. It's just, I think, great to connect with people who are actually doing 21st century technology in a broad way. And I'm very hopeful that, you know, this little visit, which was my second visit to them, is actually going to yield some benefit for us here in Arlington. There are places where they're really doing pretty cool stuff. A lot of it is in Germany, and we're going to get there here too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Garvey. Next, we'll move to Mr. Gutschall.
I was just wondering what was in the background of that picture. It was pretty
Oh, it's really
wild
cool.
looking.
I'll tell you about it later.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to very quickly offer a very quick summary of the annual report that we received from the ACTC, which is the Arlington School Choice and Transportation Choices, Arlington Committee for Transportation Choices. So the mission of the ACTC is to advise the staff, JCTC, on strategies and plans of action that will develop and promote transportation choices for APS students, families, and staff. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because they've actually been incredibly busy. This is a group of citizen volunteers who are working really hard to make sure that our kids and teachers and staff have multiple choices for how to get to school and safe choices. So some of the quick highlights of what they've done over the past 2018 to 2019 school year was they had several resolutions that they passed. One was to support the following APS Yellow Bus operational goals and priorities. They laid out some specific goals for maximizing school bus efficiency, such as a safe bus ride, safe stop location for both students and the public, on-time performance, limited ride time, efficient use of resources in the road system. They also established operational priorities. Let's reduce the yellow bus travel time, increase on-time performance, improve bus productivity, and integrate with transit and improve transportation for students with disabilities. They also continued exploration of leveraging public transit, including ART and WMATA Metro, for student transportation. They adopted the Vision Zero, endorsed the adoption of the Vision Zero strategy, which we did for Arlington County. They had a resolution to prioritize infrastructure fixes near schools for safe pedestrian and bike passage. They encouraged the school board to continue to fully fund the Transportation Demand Management, TDM program, which is the employee incentive to encourage teachers and staff to use other means besides personal vehicles to get to school. And then they set some priorities for the coming year, for the current year, really, the 2019-2020 school year. They're going to focus on the APS transportation communication in terms of letting students know what their options are, on advocating for appropriate staffing levels in APS transportation, consolidating into what are known as hub bus stops and implementing that program, which is the pilot for that had been very successful. There's an ART bus pilot currently going on for students at both the Career Center and the Heights school buildings, where students can get free fare on ART buses to get to and from school. They're going to continue to look at infrastructure improvements, help us implement Vision Zero, and transportation policies and policy implementation procedures, PIPs revisions. And finally, continued advocacy for APS staff and their transportation demand management benefits. So that's a whole lot of alphabet soup and lots of work going on, but I think it's just amazing how much they have done. And the success, you know, sometimes change takes a long time coming, but they are starting to see some real improvements, and I think many good things to come.
Terrific. Thank you for the update. Mr. DeFranti, you have a question on that?
No, just
Well, we have Ms. Crystal up next, but we'll get to you. Don't worry. Ms. Crystal for a couple of items.
Absolutely, thank you. So watchers of national news know that back in September, the Trump administration issued an executive order 13.8 88, Enhancing State and Local Involvement in Refugee Resettlement. And that executive order directed that the State Department and the Department of Health and Human Services shall resettle refugees only where state and local governments consent in writing. Leaving aside our opinions about that overall directive, Arlington is a locality that enthusiastically consents and in fact welcomes refugees. And so we took the opportunity and want to take the opportunity now to reaffirm that welcome that has been a longstanding part of this community's fabric and values. And in particular, the county manager, acting on the policy direction of the board, wrote proactively to Secretary Pompeo and to Acting Secretary McAleenan, a letter that is available at this address under our Resources for Immigrants page, noting, I think parsimoniously but well put, that Arlington County would enthusiastically welcome the resettlement of refugees in our community, consistent with our longstanding policies and practices, and in fact noted that, and I'm going to quote here, that we steadfastly believe in the universal human rights and fundamental freedoms of all peoples, and that we are committed to protecting the rights and freedoms of any individual or family resettled within our borders. And I believe that that is worth stating and worth highlighting. And I think that we have a great many people in our community who are interested in continuing to be part of Arlington's long history as a place that welcomes and is in fact enriched by refugees. So I am delighted to invite here the Northern Virginia Friends of Refugees, represented by Norma Kaysen and Ken Spiker, to talk a little bit about how Arlingtonians and community members who wish to join us in affirmatively welcoming refugees might be able to do so by getting involved in the community. So Ken, I think we've got you to come on up.
Just notes, not a speech. So I'm Ken Spiker, and this is Norma Kaysen, and we are two of the founders of Nova Friends of Refugees. Thank you so much for sending the letter. We appreciate it, and we appreciate Arlington's support of refugees. To tell you a little bit about us, we started 3 years ago with an interfaith effort. I'm a member of Mount Olivet. Norma and our other co-founder, Wendy Chan, are from St. George's. We started with the three of us. Today, there are 1,000 people in our network. So when Katie says the county is behind us and the people here are support refugees, there's the proof. We're 100% volunteers. We connect people with volunteer opportunities, and we gear it to if they've got an hour to give or they want to get involved and do something weekly or full-time with us as much as possible. We're working out of our homes and working while Wendy's at work or I'm retired, but we're making it happen. I just want to share some of the ways we provide volunteer opportunities, or we coordinate with the resettlement agencies, Catholic Charities, ECDC, and Lutheran Social Services to promote their activities, and we try and provide fill in some of the gaps they can't meet. I just want to run through a few of the things, the ways we get volunteers involved, and that's what I want you to know about. Tomorrow night will be the 5th of the employment mentoring workshops we've held, where they're not job fairs, they are counseling workshops where we get refugees who were professionals or in highly skilled jobs in their home countries and can't make that work here. This is to give them pathways to give them counseling with people from those professions to give them pathways to get back into their original employment. We've had workshops to assist refugee entrepreneurs. Our network, since it's 1,000 people, I can just give you, it's a referral resource. And the best example I can give you, if somebody finds a family, a low-income refugee family who's just here, and the mom needs dental work from a woman dentist who maybe speaks Farsi, they can get referrals in minutes. We've done advocacy training workshops with students in the area and adults. One of the students at one of them is now at George Mason and is creating a George Mason chapter of Patriots Friends of Refugees. We're real excited about that. We've done film and panel discussions. We have done advocacy work piggybacking with a lot of the refugee support agencies and organizations in DC. But a big component of what we do is celebration. We want to change the narrative about refugees and celebrate and raise awareness of the positive things that they do. In employment and culture, they are a net plus to our economy. We have had the film and panel discussions I mentioned, but the big thing we did, we were going to have and I'll aware of your time, but we were going to have a food festival, maybe hosted by a church here in Arlington, and have a refugee chef from one of the restaurants here, one refugee-owned restaurants. Well, we found a church. Sadly, it wasn't in Arlington, but now it's the One Journey Festival at the National Cathedral. It has become a national event. We just had our second one in June. We're planning the third one. Jose Andreas did a cooking segment with a chef from Yemen from South Arlington. The musicians, the dancers are all refugees. The vendors are refugees, and it's growing. We're getting interest from other cities, and I recently, thanks to Katie, I took a moment and got to one of the Arlington Art Commission evenings, and we're looking at a smaller scale possibility of working with multicultural events in Arlington to do something like that. We're going to have holiday markets that will feature refugee vendors this year. And the biggest news we've had is the Kennedy Center came and found us. We didn't apply for anything. They're offering us the chance to sponsor and organize 8 events at the new Reach Center. So we are hoping refugees from this whole area and in Arlington for sure, can come and do experimental work. I'm hoping it could be performance, but it could be something as simple as one of the Catholic Charities sewing groups could come make banners at a workshop at the Reach that would go on the street poles and feature their story, but will help weave the Kennedy Center. Their goal is to be part of the community and weave themselves into the Washington metro area community in a stronger way. Also, I'm the chair of the Arlington Crop Hunger Walk, and we also partner with the Crop Walk folks now since they support refugees as well. So all of these things are volunteer opportunities for Arlingtonians, and nobody's more surprised that it has turned out the way it has than we are, because we started with 3 people in a meeting room at St. George's 3 years ago, and it's turned into this. And there are a lot of volunteers who have made it possible. It's not just us. So I will let Norma say a couple of words since I talk too much.
Thanks, Ken.
We didn't know what to do when we began, so we have really started from scratch and learned along the way. And I reflect on the wisdom of Martin Luther King when he said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You only have to see the first step. And we have found that that is true. And there's so many easy things to do. I am amazed that this community has been as supportive as it has been. And I hope as the word gets out that more people will realize that whatever little we can do, it makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. Thank you for your leadership and for these many ways for our community members who wish to show their support, particularly at a difficult time with so many global conflicts and a national policy that many of us feel does not represent our values. It's extraordinary that we have such a homegrown opportunity to plug in and demonstrate those values in our daily lives. So we encourage you to connect with Nova Friends of Refugees on Facebook if you'd like to be part of that referral and volunteer network, or learn more about some of the amazing cultural programs that Mr. Spiker mentioned. One other way to get involved, truly one of my favorite events of the year is happening this Sunday, and that is Refugees First Thanksgiving. This is from 4 to 8 p.m. at the Ethiopian Community Development Council, which is located on South Highland Street 903. We do encourage folks to go to the ECDC Facebook page, which is where you can register so they know you're coming for dinner. This is an extraordinary event captured here well by a photograph from Lloyd Wolf and the Columbia Pike Documentary Project. It's an opportunity for the traditional foods of American Thanksgiving to get mashed up with Ethiopian food from Central America and from from many other different nations, and to be able to share the best of this tradition of abundance and community with new friends and new community members from all across the globe. I will admit that I often find myself with a lump in my throat at these events. It's just extraordinary. So really encourage other community members to join us in celebrating. Thank you, and thank you both again.
Excuse me, Ms. Crystal, before we move into your second item, if I can just share with everyone, so Executive Order 13.8, in addition to requiring that local governments express affirmatively their support, also in the way that it's worded, leaves some ambiguity that if the state doesn't follow suit in the appropriate way, that it won't be considered an adequate expression. So we're convening a sign-on effort with other like jurisdictions in the region who believe in this. And of course, we have a number of neighboring jurisdictions who share the same values that we do. We'll be signing a letter to the governor ensuring that they comply as well, so that we can ensure that we are not considered ineligible as expressing sufficient state and local support. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. We'll help you,
We'll
carry the water. All right, fantastic. So on to a different note about actually quite nearby to ECDC, come to think of it, community resource, which is the Columbia Pike Library. So just last night, I was able to co-host a meeting along with Dr. Barbara Cannon from the school board, Shannon Flanagan-Watson from the county manager's office, and colleagues from both schools, facilities, and libraries to talk about a near-term future improvement to the Columbia Pike Library that is coming to the neighborhood. So we wanted to continue to spread the word from that conversation last night. The good news is that we actually think, and I generally shy away from this term because it never is fully true, but I believe in this case it might be a win-win for the future of this facility. As many of us know, the Career Center in general is growing, but specifically the Arlington Tech program, which is a very innovative approach to project-based learning, STEM education, and other innovative practices at the secondary level, is growing by leaps and bounds. It's been incredibly popular, and they are aiming to add 600 more seats for students who wish to take advantage of this secondary program in time for 2021. So part of that capacity adjustment, there's a lot of renovation happening on the Career Center itself, but as part of that capacity expansion, there was a look to the library, which is actually a building in which we, as the county government, are a tenant of the public schools, an unusual arrangement, but one that has been around for some number of decades. And so in partnership, our library staff, schools facilities staff, and with leadership from, I know, the superintendent's office as well as the county manager's office, that design team was able to engage with Stantec, which is the architecture firm working on the Career Center expansion, to come up with a plan for renovations to the Columbia Pike Library branch. That will include a very attractive facelift for the first floor of Columbia Pike Library, and the conversion of part of the second floor into classroom spaces, which will be very flexible and open to the community after hours and on weekends. There will be a pretty significant improvement in the efficiency of the stacks and the shelves, no change to the net number of the number of volumes in the collection or to the capacity of the building. But I think we will start to see some improvements to the ceilings, to lighting, furniture, new furnishings, and so forth. As a user of the Columbia Pike Library, I'm looking forward to these improvements. We did hear from a number of community members with a variety of enthusiasm, in some cases concerns, many of them centering on the questions of the amount of time the library will be out of commission during this renovation, which is slated to begin after school concludes this school year. So as the renovation plans are finalized with the architect, I know we'll have a little bit more specificity about exactly how long that construction period is likely to take. We are talking weeks, max months, certainly not anything so long as years or anything like that. But there were a great many questions about how folks could access computers, library services, and so forth. And we are very interested in communicating well about that and making sure that people have alternatives to go to get their needs met during the time of construction. Ultimately, however, I think it is going to result in a facility that is open and welcoming to the community, as the Pike Library always has been, and a way to help this great program of Arlington Tech continue to grow.
All right, thank you. All right, next we'll move to Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually will roll this into the regional piece of the reports. I did just want to thank the manager for one separate item, which is his staff has been working on the mental health docket, and that is headed in a universal direction where all are in favor, and I was able to pop in on that meeting last night, and I just wanted to thank the manager and Deborah Warren, Michelle Cowan, everyone who helped make that happen to a shared result that I think everyone supports.
Okay, that's it. All right, thank you very much. Not that that wasn't enough, but thank you very much. All right, seeing no other more board reports, we'll move now to regional reports. I have an item, and Mr. Gutschall, I believe you one, and Mr. DeFerranti, you have one. So as the slide is being pulled up, just want to alert you to an effort which has been ongoing over the last better part of this year under the partnership of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, the Washington Council of Governments, on which I serve as vice chair, as well as the Metropolitan Washington Consortium of Universities, as well as other partners. It's being branded as Connected DMV. This is generally a smart cities initiative to our region. I realize that that term is bandied about without a lot of specificity or clarity. And just to give one perspective on it, the notion behind smart cities is usually defined by tales of autonomous vehicles and all the fabulous places that technology is going to take us into the future. And that's really the veneer on what is a more substantive effort, and one that's fundamentally driven by the whole idea that in this information age, the ability to collect and process and use data, if done intelligently, should lead to smarter and better decisions, which is what we endeavor to do in local government. And when you can have smarter and better decisions being made by government, by individuals, by business owners, that should lead to communities that are more efficient and whereby there is productivity that can create opportunity to improve standards. And technology is really the tool, not really the end, but the tool to provide what are, ultimately the goal of any smart cities initiatives, and that is to have real, clear, and substantial community benefits. And in order to ensure that those benefits are broadly shared, a general thesis of smart cities is that you have to have connectivity. And if you have connectivity and you have it throughout the region, you create the atmosphere where the well-off communities or well-off segments of communities won't rise while others stagnate or fall behind, but really that everyone can move forward together. So that's sort of the guiding ethos behind it. And Connected DMV is taking an approach to really figure out how to leverage this whole idea of information technology to improve community in many ways. So you can obviously think of benefits when it comes to transportation and mobility, and about giving people not only access to the different choices that are available to them, but making sure that those various choices are guided by best-in-class ways to move people efficiently and to reduce congestion and environmental effects. But it also just means making sure information is more broadly shared to everyone to help make decisions about where to invest in air quality improvements, where to invest in stormwater management. The whole idea of connecting our community and creating a culture where technology can be applied to solving our problems is essentially what this effort is trying to do. So it is launched this year, and it is including regular convenings of all of these interested stakeholders from the public, private sectors, and academia, who are trying to figure out the scope of how to address connecting our region in a smart, intelligent way, and also ensuring that projects can proceed efficiently and effectively. I'm articulating this a lot more easily than is going to be realized in implementing this, but it's an incredibly important strategy that I think is growing in importance and understanding for the region to wrap its head around. And just to assuage any concerns, front and foremost is an understanding that cybersecurity and protecting us against our inherent vulnerabilities when it comes to a connected world are front and foremost in this. But one of the things that I've been persuaded of is that each of our jurisdictions and entities within the region all pursuing our own course to keep our systems secure without having a broader approach is probably not the smartest thing in the world to do. So in a connected DMV, we also hope to create a more secure DMV. And I'm not one who usually loves the DMV branding, but in this case, it is what it is, and that's what I'll be spending some time coordinating on the COG level. All right, Mr. Gutschall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quick report. Several of us had the opportunity over the Veterans Day weekend to attend the Virginia Association of Counties, otherwise known as VACO, annual conference down in Homestead, Virginia. I am the representative of this board, as the appointed liaison from this board to the board of directors of VACO, and had the opportunity to participate in some very interesting conversations. It's really quite fascinating to me how our brethren throughout the Commonwealth, even from very rural districts, very rural locations, really at the end of it all, we all want the same thing for our communities. We all want to have good governance. We all want the ability to make sure that we have a high quality of life in our respective localities. And one of the things that came up that I wanted to raise to make to our attention was the notion of utility scale solar. And we think of it from, I think, from our perspective of that we want to make sure that we've adopted our goals for 100% renewable electricity for our county operations by 2025, and county-wide, community-wide by 2035, that we would have 100% renewal. So obviously, we want to generate as much of that as we can within our borders, but we know that we're going to rely on getting some of that outside of our jurisdiction, and that is likely to come from some of these more rural places, and they are very excited about the avalanche, the tidal wave that they are seeing that is coming towards new solar farms in these communities. However, the issue that was raised, and this is where our commonality, where we'll recognize this, the issue that was raised is that through some state legislation that was designed to incentivize the development of these solar farms, the ability of the counties to collect tax, to get any kind of meaningful tax revenue off of those solar farms, was severely hampered, as was their ability to control where those the conditions and how those solar farms are installed. So one Board of Supervisor member shared with me how in her county they had this, it was something like a 40-acre solar farm that was put in. Yeah, huge. And all of the runoff from it, it created new runoff, and so they had a huge stormwater issue with rain. It was creating erosion on the nearby stream. And they had no authority or ability to ask the now the owner of this solar farm to provide any kind of mitigation or provide any resources. They don't have the tax base to deal with that stormwater erosion runoff. So the whole point of all of this is just to make sure that this was a much talked about topic. I suspect it'll be a lot happening around this in the General Assembly. I really am, we should all be very, very grateful that we have the fantastic services of Pat Carroll, who really understands the ins and the outs and the various perspectives on these kinds of issues and will navigate our position, I know quite well, but just wanted to alert this board to that. And then the second major issue, and the Board of Directors actually adopted this as the main priority for VACO for the entire legislative session, is equal taxing authority, to equalize taxing authority between counties and cities and towns. And they have actually produced a very short video that I think we have queued up that I will share with you and the community. I got a lot of mileage out of this example. So I think we've had a long-standing, great relationship with VACO and their ability to help us advocate for what we want, and that's certainly going to continue into this next General Assembly, and let's see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gutschall. And for our third regional report, Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just very briefly, wanted to pull up a couple of slides. The Council of Governments Human Services Committee this month, we really focused on one of the most inspiring steps I've seen in the last 3 months or 6 months, which is the effort in the District of Columbia to have affordable housing in all 8 wards, which growing up here, that was just not an initiative that moved forward. So really was impressed with the effort of the staff there to describe how equity and sustainability in DC itself have been moving forward, and that was great to see. We also had a presentation on sustainability, and I felt like the rest of the region in that case, I guess I'll say, was continuing to catch up with Arlington because of our lead city's platinum designation several years ago. But it's good to see in the region broader effort to work on that. And really, it was a series of presentations that were all focused on equity and sustainability. So it was helpful to see some pointers for us to learn from, but mostly inspired by the housing piece of it most of all. So that's that Council of Governments subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFerranti. All right, we'll now move to consideration of our advisory group appointments for November. And as I move these, remember, this does not require a second, but certainly if there's any conversation about any of these proposed appointments, please do chime in. To the Arlington 100th Anniversary Steering Commission, we'll appoint Frank Balavia for a term ending December 30th, 2020. To the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission, reappointing both Alexandra Rothenberger and Michelle Santuoso for terms ending November 30th, 2020. For the Citizens Advisory Commission on Housing, to appoint Charles Sims and Laura Saul Edwards, terms ending November 30th, 2023. To the Commission on Aging, 3 reappointments, Carl Brooks, Sophie Shen, and Martha Villanegro Santiago for terms ending September 30th, 2022. Commission on the Arts, reappointing Marcia Semmel for a term ending June 30th, 2020. For the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee, reappointing Diane Dustin for a term ending November 30th, 2022. To the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, reappointing Christina Diaz-Torres for a term ending November 30th, 2021. To the Park and Recreation Commission, reappointing David Howell, term ending November 30th, 2021, and designating Sergio Enriquez as Vice Chair. For the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, appointing both Kim DeBlau and Anne-Marie Douglas for terms ending November 30th, 2021. To the Sports Commission, appointing Ryan Schaefer, term ending November 30th, 2021, and reappointing Steve Severn for a term ending September 30th, 2021. To the Transportation Commission, appointing Darren Buck, term ending end of November 2022. For the Commission on the Status of Women, appointing Nahal Abuelnor for a term ending November 30th, 2020, and she will be serving as a student non-voting member. In fact, the rest are all going to be student non-voting members as part of the initiative that Mr. Gutschall championed and created with Marymount University. So next, for the Energy and Environment Energy Conservation Commission, Frederick Blemano as a student representative, term ending a year from now. Historical Affairs and Landmark Review, Ozge Kochak, for a term ending November 30th, a year from now. Human Rights Commission, Guamaral Ekembayar, for a term ending November 30th, 1 year from now. Information Technology Advisory Council, Jocelyn Diaz-Gonzalez, for a term ending 1 year from now. Park and Recreation Commission, appointing Ryan Gormley. And for the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, appointing Madeline Vasquez Pena. All of those student terms end November 30th, 2020. Does not need a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Gutschall?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge this is the second year of this program. We've expanded it a little bit with the Marymount student appointees. And even though they are non-voting members, they otherwise fully participate in the work of the commission, they receive all the same materials, can ask questions, can participate in the conversation that leads up to the vote. And we've also expanded the number of commissions that we have appointees for, as well as we're going to work on strengthening the connection between the students' work on these commissions and their academic work and their academic advisor, to make sure that that the community, that Arlington is getting something out of it. To Ms. Crystal's point about a win-win, this is also a win-win. The community is getting something out of the service offered by the volunteer service by these students, but also that the students are getting out of it a good experience for themselves and a nice jump start on their career building.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, and I'm the liaison to the ITAC Commission, and, you know, our residents and our commissioners got all kinds of talents. Who knew? The chair does student interns all the time. That's part of what she does in her work. She loves working with student interns, so I'm sure everybody's going to work out great, but I'm sure we're going to be fine with ITAC, and I think it's great. Thank you.
All right, excellent. So we're now ready to move on to the manager's report, and I know you have a number of items today, Mr. Schwartz.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start off with a report on the Arlington Racial Equity
Oh,
Cohort.
I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. I guess we didn't go through with the procedural vote.
Oh, sorry.
So if you'll hold on, Mr. Schwartz, all those appointments will not happen until we affirmatively vote to make it happen. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations to all of our new and returning commissioners, and thank you very much for stepping up to assist the county board in its deliberative work. Now it's over to you, Mr.
Thank
Schwartz.
you. As you know, in September, the county board adopted a resolution on equity, and you spoke at that time about the Council of Governments and its racial equity cohort. And Arlington County, along with staff from other jurisdictions in the region, is participating in this program, which is a 9-month program. There are 15 staff representing various departments. Those 15 staff include 3 from Arlington Public Schools. And so each month, as part of my manager's report, through June, when the program concludes, I've asked a member, in this case members, of the cohort to present to the board and the community information on what they're hearing, what they're learning, and takeaways, and to keep the board and community engaged and involved in this initiative. So this month we have Ann Gable from Libraries, Richard Stevenson from the Department of Management and Finance, and Dr. Ruben Varghese, who is our Public Health Division Chief from the Department of Human Services. And they're here to talk about their work with the cohort. And I'm just as interested as you because I have not been privy to what it is they're going to say. So turn it over to you, Ann.
Get ready. We did want to briefly go through the folks that are on the group with us. Tiffany Wesley from Fire, Paula Brockenborough from Police, Farzine Farzad from HR, Jennifer Fioretti from Parks, myself, David Herlihy from DTS, Arlova Vanum, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, CPHD, Mike Collins, DES, Ruben, and Richard behind me, DHS and DMF, and the 3 folks from schools are Julia Burgess, Carolyn Jackson, and Corey Dotson. And we wanted to note that we're one of only 2 jurisdictions that also has our schools folks with us, which we feel like is really important, very beneficial, and we're all just really grateful that we have had the opportunity to be there all together. So one of the things they have emphasized to us at the training repeatedly is to really normalize the conversation about race and racial equity and just get comfortable talking about it. So the first thing I will say is that it's very intentional that the whole group is diverse, and it's intentional that the group you see here is diverse. And as we talk to you all, and we talk to Mark, and we talk to staff in our departments about this, we're going to make sure that everyone gets the message that this is about all of us. It's not about any one person's skin color. We all have a role in the conversation, and that's a very intentional thing as we work to normalize the conversation for all of us. So we have met as a group 3 times with all the jurisdictions. And the first 2 times, we're really focusing on those kind of things, normalizing the conversation around race, giving us the kind of language that we need to have those conversations comfortably. Why racial equity? Differences between bias and bigotry and some of the interpersonal things that people experience, and then where institutional and structural racism come into it. And we also spent a good portion of time talking about the history of government policies and how they've impacted us through today. One thing that was very profound for all of us is we spent a couple hours talking about redlining. And in the 1930s, systemic discrimination against certain groups in terms of mortgage and lending and banks, and the impact that had on home ownership rates, wealth accumulation, ultimately the segregation of neighborhoods, things like the placement of highways, health outcomes based on all of those things. And they really did show us how all of these policies, the ripple effects, are with us all today. And one of the things the group is going to be working on is a timeline for Arlington. So we're going to put some of Arlington's historical events into a timeline that help us think about how we as a community have gotten to where we are today. So the third full day, we really got into data and how we need to use data to be specific and targeted and hold ourselves accountable. We've just started delving into that, and that will get us eventually almost a full year from now where we need to be, which is coming back to you all in September 2020 with a racial equity tool, which is what was in your equity resolution. So we've really just gotten started, a lot of interesting conversations. The group has met, just our Arlington group has met offline several times. And one of our homework assignments, which is what I will finish up with, was to come up with a tagline and a vision, which you would think sounds easy, but several hours later, more than that probably, our tagline is realizing Arlington's commitment to equity, which the acronym is RACE. Very clever. Mm-hmm. And that's meant to have a double meaning too. We wanted to convey the sense of urgency that we hope everyone feels. This isn't meant to be just theoretical. It's meant to be something urgent that we work on now. And the vision is an equitable Arlington is where all are valued, educated, healthy, and safe regardless of race. So we look forward to continuing, and you will hear many more reports. And I don't know if Ruben and Richard have anything to add.
I think more than anything else, I want to reiterate what Ann led with. Thank you for the vision for putting this forward and sponsoring this cohort and the collaboration with the schools. I think it is what we need to be able to show that it's really one community that is actually moving forward with this.
And one of my, roles in the process is not only do we have a diverse group, but a diverse mindset around it. We're all coming from very different places and personal experiences. And then, of course, the desire to see how this can be integrated into the decision and policy-making decisions of the budget. We're working in parallel now. It's not a direct intersection. We're learning, we're educating, we're normalizing. So hopefully pieces will materialize in the budget process this year, but moving forward, laying the groundwork for those conversations to come.
Great. Well, very much appreciate this early check-in. Mr. Schwartz, will you allow comments from?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, Ms. Garvey.
I actually had one comment and one question. I think this is great. In the school board, oh boy, I think we're 15 years ago now, started courageous conversations about race, and that really changed my outlook on the world. This sounds like a next step, which is really, really good, but it's incredibly, incredibly valuable and has helped me a lot in my work. When is the timeline going to be available? Because I'm also doing the 2020 celebration of Arlington's 100th, and we're trying to do Arlington at 100 back and looking forward. This timeline would be wonderful to have.
I would say, We're working on it. I would say within a couple weeks, a month, it is something, yeah.
Done. We're
Yeah.
good to go. All right.
And we're welcoming anyone to add to the timeline,
Yes.
because this is what we know ourselves among the
Yes.
cohort. No pride in authorship. We want people to contribute to letting us understand what has happened based on race throughout our history. And we also have the ability to look at Alexandria and Washington in some ways to add to the timeline, because we've been here that long.
Well, that's great, and because in the 2020, we're going to take the whole year to do this, and kind of keep it a living document, so maybe people can keep kind of adding things as we have more discussions. We're hoping to do a wrap-up this time next year, and really kind of take a holistic view about where we're going, where we've been and where we are going, where we want to be. So I think we're right on the same track. This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great. It's going to be really good for the county.
Terrific. All right, thank you all
welcome.
three of you, and please share our, four of you, and please share our thoughts with the rest of the cohort. Thank you.
So next item I wanted to cover, we've had underway since, I think probably early last calendar year in 2018, the county board appointed a World War I commemoration task force. And the task force asked that the county undertake an interpretive project near the Clarendon War Memorial to honor the centennial of World War I. And so on behalf of the task force, the historic preservation staff successfully applied for a grant from the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. And that $2,000 grant was used towards the creation of some new signage at the Clarendon War Memorial. And the county is one of the 100 national recipients of these grants. And this two-year project was led by the Historic Preservation Program staff in collaboration with the county's World War I Task Force, and also my office, the local veterans groups, the Historic Affairs and Landmark Review Board, and colleagues from many departments. So I know that Ms. Crystal had the opportunity to see these when she was, along with myself and other members of the community, at the event on November 11th at the Clarendon War Memorial. What I wanted to do was put up a picture here, at least, of the panels. You'll see that the project itself consists of 11 new historic markers in Clarendon Central Park, one about the history of the War Memorial itself, and others that highlight the 5 international conflicts represented on the memorial in which Arlington residents lost their lives. So there's a panel there for World War I, Korea, Vietnam, World War II, and I think the Gulf conflict, if I have that right. So there you see our Historic Affairs staff, Cynthia Luces Torres, Angelina Jones, Serena Bollinger, and Lauren Ferris. And it was really quite a nice day. I think you'll see Mr. Byrne in the background there. So we have, the overall goal of the project was to enhance the engagement and have people come to visit the War Memorial and make sure that they have an opportunity to learn more again about our history. And these events, many of these events are about 100 years ago, as Ms. Garvey talked about. And I think, do we have any more slides on this? I think that, we actually have a couple more slides, I think. If you click, yep. There's the last one was the Global War on Terror. And I think with that concludes my presentation on this specific item. But I would encourage everybody to go out and take a look. They're really interesting and worth your time.
Thank you very much.
So next up, I wanted to, Mike Collins is going to join me. And we have with us some incredible staff from the Department of Environmental Services. As you all know, and as I mentioned on Saturday, the early morning hours of November 8th, one of the county's largest water mains ruptured on North Glebe Road, just south of Chain Bridge. And the consequences were pretty much instantaneous, which led to a boil water advisory affecting portions of Arlington and the District of Columbia and washing out a large portion of the road. So I'm going to ask Mike Collins to provide some details and go over essentially what was the first 48 hours and also introduce the employees who got the call at probably 4 o'clock in the morning and headed out and did some phenomenal work. So Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Board members. So I am here today to try and provide some context as to the complexity of the response and the recovery, and really to highlight the amazing employees that responded with extraordinary competence, professionalism, and commitment. I also do want to thank the partner agencies that helped us to recover. But while I'm up here, I figured I'd first extend our gratitude and support to the community. We applaud the resilience which they displayed, and while we work to restore normalcy, and we're really grateful for the hundreds of messages of appreciation which they've conveyed to us. That really has been very gratifying. So getting into the specifics of the break, though, we're having some technology issues, but I'll go ahead and keep going, and we've got some slides to support it. The catastrophic break, which occurred at about 2:56 a.m. per our, what's called our SCADA clock, it had an instantaneous and catastrophic effect on Glebe Road. The water moving in that 36-inch pipe at a pressure of 135 pounds per square inch, that equates to a force of 65 tons, actually a little bit more than 65 tons of force. So instantaneously, large portions of the Arlington and the DC water system began to drain as a result of the damage. At our water control center down at the Trade Center, our 2 overnight operators were immediately confronted with multiple audible and visual alarms on our control systems. We think it was about less than 3 minutes after the break, we received our first customer call. About at 2:59 in the morning. And at 2:59 in the morning, they reported no water in the 1200 block of North Lincoln Street. That's almost 3 miles away from the break. From that point, calls were incessant. There are a lot of people up at 3 in the morning getting ready for work. And so our control center operators were immediately trying to respond to the alarms, but also provide the customer service that we strive to provide. Our on-call water maintenance supervisor was the first on site at about 3:50 in the morning out there at Glebe Road, and he encountered a main break unlike any that he had seen before. We do have a video which we may be able to play or may not, but there is no video which can do justice to the sight and sound and the trembling which that kind of break creates. Shutting down yeah, there you go. So it's but being out there is a whole different experience. It's awe-inspiring. As we confronted that, though, the first challenge we had is shutting down a main of this size, pressure, and importance. It's a complicated and delicate operation. Our valve crew, which arrived soon behind our maintenance manager, quickly devised a plan to isolate this section of pipe and to address the immediate danger. That plan consisted of identifying the necessary valves, locating them, because they're often covered under leaves and dirt and debris, and then carefully operating them by hand against extraordinary pressure. Closing each of these valves is a 2-man operation, and when valves of this size and pressure are operated against this type of force, they literally generate an earthquake. The entire ground vibrates as these valves close or open. And I'll admit, I even turned to our maintenance distribution supervisor and said, "This is okay?" And he chuckled at me. I had not experienced shutting a valve of this size before. So our crew's smart shutdown plan required operation of only 4 valves. So this just indicates the knowledge and the ability the skill they had in analyzing our maps and our system. But these 4 valves, they are separated by 1.5 miles, and one of the valves was on the other side of the break, which we had to address by an 8-mile detour through McLean because Kirby Road is closed. So shutting down those valves was more complicated than it could have been in other situations. But first of them was closed at 5:30 in the morning, and the last of them was closed around 6:15. The fact that their initial shutdown plan was successful without complication is a result of their clear thinking under pressure, their familiarity with and understanding of our system, and just skill. When you operate a valve like these valves, you create sudden changes in the hydrodynamics in a system. And if you're not doing it carefully and gently, you can create ancillary breaks. So this successful and critically important first step in recovery was also the result of intentional maintenance, as each of these valves, which we had to operate, had been exercised within the last several months to year, as part of a deliberate program we've undertaken to ensure the health and functionality of our water valves. So while our valve crews were out there stabilizing our system, our engineers were at the Water Control Center making cool evaluations of the situation. They were coordinating with our water supplier, the Washington Aqueduct, and with our partner utility, DC Water. These engineers determined that we needed to issue a boil water advisory notice, and that's a decision which is not made lightly and has not been made in Arlington in a generation. So I can tell you, the engineers that made that decision had a lot of weight on their shoulders. Once the situation was stabilized, our construction managers and crews took the stage and mobilized resources to restore normalcy to our community. We were on the ground with people and machines earlier than 10 a.m. Throughout the day Friday, as crews excavated the damage, our engineers sought to identify the appropriate means and methods of repairing this pipe. The gasket that was necessary to fit a pipe of this size, the gasket is the seal that when we couple the pipes together, we could not find a gasket that fit this size of pipe and could operate at this pressure anywhere in the eastern half of the country. So those engineers that had already made several momentous decisions considered many alternatives, but ultimately decided that we needed to stabilize the pipe, temporarily restore the roadway to service, and return for permanent work while the gasket was manufactured and shipped from Texas. Final water main repairs were completed without complication overnight, the evening of Wednesday, November 13th to 14th. And we are developing plans for permanent roadway restoration with VDOT and the National Park Service. In the days after the break, our crews and contractors worked around the clock to restore the road to service, and we successfully did that and validated the continued safety of our water system less than 48 hours or slightly more than 48 hours after the main break. Throughout this period, we had an army of support, including our police department, the Department of Public Safety, Communication and Emergency Management, and our Public Health Division of DHS. Particularly, we had unfailing support from our DES technology team, who generated maps and tools to assist our customers in mere minutes of our requests. Our customer service team, who you'll meet some of them, also took over customer calls at 7 a.m. and provided relevant and timely information to our customers in a dynamic and rapidly evolving situation. And our DES communications team met and exceeded their extraordinarily high standards. Their deep understanding of our work environment and the employees that keep our community functioning means that they can seamlessly provide relevant and accurate information to the community without interfering or interrupting in the important work. It's a privilege to have that type of support from the entire organization. We have begun 2 after-action initiatives with an interdepartmental after-action analysis focused upon our collaboration and interagency as well as external communications. And we're going to do an internal document to analyze the technical conditions which led to the break, as well as the technical aspects of our system's response. We have already identified several immediate areas to celebrate, particularly our collaboration and coordination with internal agencies and validation of our initiatives to ensure the health and functionality of our valves, our valve exercise and maintenance program. Any delays to the stabilization effort that morning would have compounded the impacts felt by our community. The real story of this event, however, was the team of outstanding and dedicated professionals, which we are fortunate to call colleagues, and who are represented by a number of people today. And I'm going to ask all of our employees to come on up here, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. Come on up, guys. All of you. Come on, right up here. So, I'm going to tell a little bit about each one of them briefly. Renita is first up. Renita Johnson is, an 18-year employee at Water Sewer Streets. She manages the Water Control Center. She was awoken at her home just after 3 a.m. by automated alarms and immediately reported to the control center, and she set the immediate tone of the response, which is one of competence and capacity. Richard Talley, where is Richard? Is Richard not here? Tim's representing Richard then.
Tim and Jeff and Ron.
Tim, Jeff, and, well, Ron I'm going to get to later. Tim and Jeff on our water distribution crew. These guys are part of the team that developed and implemented the water shutdown. Their ability to analyze the situation, develop and execute a plan in the face of such volatility and urgency is a testament to their skill and competence. The successful shutdown was the first and ultimately the most important milestone in recovery. Lewis Robinson. Lewis Robinson is our operations manager for our water system. Raise your hand, Lewis.
Hi, how you guys doing?
He was the point person for all water restoration from the time he arrived on site, probably 4:30 in the morning, through the reopening of Glebe Road, after final repairs were achieved 6 days later. He and his crews also, this is an important anecdote, he and his crews also successfully responded to 5 other water main breaks in this time period. An example of how those employees routinely address emergencies, most of which generate a lot less attention. Carla Alayan manages our construction management group in Water Sewer Streets, and she was instrumental in identifying and coordinating the contractors with the goal of restoring Glebe Road to traffic at the earliest possible time. Is Ryan here as well? Yep, Ryan Borghetti. He stayed overnight monitoring the work and ensuring that the road was open Sunday morning, so much so that when I got out there at 5:30 Sunday morning, I was alarmed to see no activity until I saw the beautiful work that they had finished. Noel Picard and Walter Reyes. Walter, there you are. Noel's right up front. Walter's right there. These guys are 2 of our customer service representatives that came on duty that Friday morning at 7 a.m., just as our community was becoming aware of the situation. These 2 took the mantle from Renita's group at the control center, and all customer service calls were transferred to them as of 7 a.m. Their efforts are made more extraordinary by the fact that they had just assumed ownership of those calls the day prior. This was essentially the second day, their second day on this job, and they shined. Noel's been here for about 3 months now, and Walter, though, is a more seasoned employee. Walter, you have what, 8 years? 7 years. 7 years, close. Yes, it was remarkable, their performance. Micah Denton back there, Joe Cogswell, and Ron Vaughn are part of our engineering group at Water Sewer Streets, and they handled all manner of critical tasks throughout this event. Specific things that they did, Joe Cogswell took the lead in scouring the eastern portion of the country, trying to find the gasket and couplings which would fit this diameter pipe under this pressures. And Ron and Micah, they developed and implemented the water sampling effort, which validated the safety of our system and allowed us to assure our customers that they could consume tap water without hesitation as of Sunday morning. Tim Ernest works in our GIS mapping center. We also wanted to highlight Jamie Gilland, but he had to stay home today. They were able to Jamie developed maps and conducted analyses of our schools and other affected critical facilities about 6:10 in the morning within 5 minutes. Tim developed the really amazing and popular mapping address tool, which allowed our customers to determine if they were affected by the boil water advisory. He developed that in less than 60 minutes. These tools and support helped us manage the situation, helped our customers understand it, and also helped Walter and Noel and their team to help talk our customers through it. Katie O'Brien over there running the computer, and I don't see Peter Gulkin, but Peter Gulkin and Katie O'Brien are 2 of our extraordinarily talented and devoted communication staff. When I was awoken just before 5 a.m., Peter and Katie were already working this event. They are so deeply integrated into our operations that they know what we do and how we do it, which makes them exceptionally qualified to best represent our work while serving the community. Hector Moreno. I think Hector's the last one I have to identify out there. Hector's one of our trades manager leaders for a street construction and maintenance crew. He was out there supporting Lewis and Carla stabilizing the road and helping to restore the ditches adjacent to the roadway so that we could get it open Sunday. And finally, all of this amazing work happened under the primary direction of our chief operating engineer for water, Amani Aisa. Amani's been tutored by several long-term employees and exceptional county engineers. She has absorbed their knowledge and always striven to learn more, do more, and excel. She is a quintessential operational engineer, and she was extraordinary, both through the actions of her team represented here and back at Trade Center, and through her individual decisions and judgment and courage. She was the one that made the tough decisions and owned the responsibility for the welfare of our community. Thank you, guys. These outstanding employees.
Katie, get in the picture.
Take one for me, please.
Yes, of course. All right, so I have 2 cameras, so try to do this. Sorry, I'm not very tall, so there you go. Thank you.
Okay, so continuing our focus on water in its various forms, I'm going to ask Mike Collins, and he's promised me that in, 180 seconds, he's going to go through a presentation on our snow preparations. Take it away, Mike.
We're going to skip a few slides. Katie? So what I'll talk about this year, we'll talk about just very quickly, a couple new features that we've got. We are going to be promoting a new snow activity map this season for our residents. We're excited about the range of information and access that this feature will offer to our community. We'll talk about it in just a second. We continue to work with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality on our snow fight and our snow fighting partners in the region to identify best practices fighting snow while minimizing the impact of chlorides on our community. We're replacing obsolete equipment with new technologies, very neat and functional things such as electric salt spreaders as opposed to gasoline salt spreaders. And they are actually, in addition to being not relying on fossil fuels, they're actually much easier to operate and maintain. Finally, we have assumed responsibility for a segment of Boundary Channel into our system as of this year. Let's go on to the snow map. So here is an example of our snow map. So this map, which will be public-facing this year, is intended to be a one-stop shop for our residents to try and get a context of where we are at with our snow response activities. You'll see it's labeled very specifically Snow Activity Map. It does not intend to represent that a street is clear or not clear. It intends to illustrate how much activity we have invested on each street. So those lines, red street would mean that none of our trucks have been down that street, and the blue lines indicate we have had trucks down that street. The thicker the line is, the more activity we've had on our streets. This map also has connects directly to our traffic cameras, which allows our residents to get a view of what the actual street conditions look like at any intersection. And it also links to our snow report forum, so people can see where their neighbors have submitted requests for treatment of snow. This map is, as I said, it's intended to just be a representation of the work. There are some caveats that we issue with the form. It will not necessarily have all of our contractor vehicles, particularly as we have to mobilize for very heavy events. The trucks, which you can see there and are live, which will be live during an event, they are on a 15-minute delay, so people may be disappointed if they want to go wave as they drive by their house because they'll be 15 minutes behind. And we will also typically just activate that map for full mobilizations.
Okay, so with that, and I just going to remind everybody, because I know people remember this, in 2016, we did have a map up. It didn't go so well for us, okay? And a lot of this is about setting expectations, and people should understand we had a long conversation about whether we should make this version of it live, and embracing the innovation culture, okay, which is really important. We think we have something that's very valuable, but it will not tell you that your street has been plowed, okay? I would still encourage you, in combination with this map and our cameras, which everybody has access to take a look and follow the information on our website. So looks like we're not going to get any snow in November, but we will see come December what happens. So with that, I would like to thank Mike, and I'd like to move on to our last item because I know that's fairly substantial, and I wanted to make sure we set aside some time for that.
All right, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Collins.
So Stephen Krim is going to join me along with other members of the parking team. No, okay. Okay. We wanted to update the county board and the community on the status of our residential permit parking analysis. We have gone through multiple rounds of public engagement and done a lot of analysis of conditions across the county. And I know that this program is important and popular and not popular in certain places. And so we wanted to make this presentation and lay out some potential policy principles that will help frame the discussions as we move forward to adopting a new policy. So with that, Stephen, Mike is yours.
Thank you. So to give a little more detail on what we plan to cover with you today, we are going to do a quick review of what the program is, why we're reviewing it, what we've accomplished through some of the items that Mr. Schwartz has laid out. And we really want your guidance on the principles that we will be sharing with you, and that's the bulk of this presentation, because this is going to be the framework for the rest of our engagement with the public, and we think it's important, especially given, as Mr. Schwartz mentioned, the popularity and also controversial nature of the program, that we have checked in with you, that this is the right frame for our next steps. Just as a bit of mention, we are fortunate enough to have two of our colleagues from police with us to answer any questions that you might have related to the enforcement of the program. So by way of brief overview, as you know, the RPP program manages on-street parking demand in primarily low-density residential areas, for the most part around the metro corridors. The program was last updated or reviewed through a process that ended in 2005. And since that time, there have been, consistent concerns raised by residents about equity and fairness with the program. But really one of the most important impetuses that you may remember is that in the years of FY 2015, 16, 17, we were receiving a large increase in the volume of petitions that were coming into our office, most of which were failing, which indicated to us that members of the public had very different expectations for the program than we did as staff and as we understood the program. So that was a major reason to undertake this review. We instituted, or the manager instituted, a moratorium on petitions for the extension or modification of restrictions in August of 2017, though of course restrictions that are already out there remain in effect and people are still able to get their permits. And I'll remind you that the moratorium for modifications will stay in place until this review is complete. As a bit of brief history here, you see the evolution of the program from its origins in the 1970s, where it began in Aurora Highlands to manage commuter parking. It then expanded to other neighborhoods close to our denser development. And in 2003, the board first took action to make nighttime zones by special action outside of the normal administrative process of the program. And you'll see here the description of the major changes that came with the 2005 reforms. So what have we been doing as part of this review? Well, from 2017 through earlier this year, we, for one, have collected data about parking on our public streets across 4 areas of the county, many streets around Columbia Pike, Clarendon, Virginia Square area, the streets around the Virginia Hospital Center, as well as various parts of the neighborhoods around Richmond Highway, Aurora Highlands, and Arlington Ridge. We've had internal conversations about delivery of the program with other county staff and public schools. And we've hosted 2 rounds of in-person engagement to really discover what the issues were that the community was most concerned about with the program. And then that informed the creation of a survey that went out to a random sample of households in the spring of 2019, where we asked questions about preferences for the program, current use of the program, and so on. And we were fortunate to receive about 4,500 responses to that survey. Now, throughout this presentation, you're going to see bits of information about the information, or you're going to see bits on what we discovered through this engagement. Bless you. But here I want to start with some background information that is really just sort of fundamental to understand, I think, for the rest of what we're going to share with you today. As a whole of a population or as a community, there is little resident agreement on how the program should function going forward. Resident opinions about the program frequently vary according to whether or not someone is already in the program and the housing type in which he or she lives. And even where you see, say, majority opinions about a question or an issue, you will still see sizable minority opinions that contradict that. One major finding that we think is important here is that most residents with RPP like it, and those who do not have it do not want to get it. Though I will say that the 14% of people that you see here that want RPP and that do not have it, they were, of course, very motivated to come out to our in-person engagement in 2018. And while we are talking about on-street parking with the residential permit parking program, off-street parking, be it garages, parking lots, driveways, that comes up a lot too in conversations around RPP because, of course, the residents, members of the community see this all as one supply of parking. And so one of the things we wanted to get a handle on was an estimate of the amount of off-street parking that our residents have access to. And so we undertook analysis of that using multiple data sources and, of course, found quite a bit of range, some of all types of housing here, and we've broken the housing into single-family detached, single-family attached, such as townhomes and duplexes, as well as multifamily buildings. You know, some of each of these buildings have 0 off-street parking and can go as high as 8 spaces per unit in the single-family detached. And here you see the medians, where the median single-family detached home has 3.5 spaces off-street, single-family attached has 2, and the median multifamily unit has 1.1. Now, before I get into talking about what we found in terms of parking demand or the use of on-street parking, let me just do a quick reminder of what we mean when we say parking occupancy, which is a term that I've probably already used without defining here this evening. But just as a reminder, occupancy is simply the number of cars parked on a block divided by the number of legal parking spaces. And here we see 3 examples of a diagrammatic street where you would see what different levels of occupancy might look like to somebody looking for parking. So at 40% occupied, you see there's quite a few spaces available that are easy to find, and as you move down there at about 75% occupied, there's still parking, but it's a little bit harder to find, and you have to be looking a little more carefully. Now, this slide contains a lot of information about what we heard from the public as well as our data collection, and I think one of the key takeaways here is that our public expects parking to be easy. We have heard from many residents through our focused engagement here and in other events that they want to be able to park in front of their houses and that they want their guests to generally be able to park on the same block, if not in front of the house that they're visiting. Moving down the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see here that residents actually start to say that parking is difficult and that they want RPP when restrictions are about when occupancy is about 45% to 50%. And that's in the early evening hours, like weekdays between 6 and 8 p.m. That's what we looked at as the reference. Now that is below the lower end of our targets in the Master Transportation Plan. The Master Transportation Plan says that we should have a target of occupancy of no less than 60% occupied. And of course, that 45 to 50% is certainly a lot lower than the 75% occupancy that a street must have in order to get RPP restrictions under the current program. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see here some of our findings about occupancy on our streets. So most streets with RPP restrictions are no more than half full on weekday afternoons. They, in general, on weekday evenings are no more than 65% full. Some are, but most of the streets that we looked at with RPP restrictions are no more than 65% occupied. The exception to that, though, is that the Clarendon, Virginia Square area did have higher evening occupancy. So in that area, occupancy generally didn't get above 75%, a little bit higher than the other areas that we looked at. I'll also mention that through our survey work, we found that the RPP program does improve the public's sense of how easy it is to find parking. So more people with RPP restrictions say that it is easy to find parking than those who don't have them. And as a final note on this occupancy piece, I'll say that less than 20% of the streets with RPP restrictions were ever seen to have occupancy over 75%. So in general, I'd say that the program certainly is meeting many of its goals in terms of the numerical targets and making people feel that they are able to find parking. So what we want to do now is walk you through 6 areas or themes that we have identified through all of this work. And this is the framework through which we intend to engage the public in our remaining public engagement activities. And for each of these themes that you see here, we've developed principles on each of the topics. I want to stress again that we found little consensus in our engagement with the public on this issue, just as staff reported back in 2005 during the last review. And we recognize that no principle or subsequent policy will please everyone. The first theme here, of course, is the purpose of the RPP program. Currently, restrictions are given only when parking is hard to find and when vehicles that are parked there or on a given street are not registered to the homes in that area. And when we asked residents, why do you want RPP or why do you like having RPP and want to keep it, most people gave some answer related to parking availability and ease of parking. And with this question and the graph that you see on the right-hand side here, people were able to give up to 3 reasons why they like or want to have RPP. Now, I will note that 1 in 5 residents who have RPP want it in order to reduce noise, litter, other issues, and about 1/4 to 1/3 of those who want to have RPP who don't already have it said the same thing. So there are groups of people who think that the program has major benefits other than for parking management. However, our principle for this theme is that RPP should remain a program that is in place to manage parking demand. And we came to this principle because the MTP encourages us to promote on-street parking. And after all, as a public resource, there is an efficiency that we should, an efficient management that we should maintain for our on-street parking. And if we give RPP for restrictions other than parking management, we could see further reductions in the utilization of that public resource. There's also no comprehensive plan guidance to use RPP for purposes other than parking management. And while the intent language of the ordinance that allows us to have this program does mention things that are aside from parking, those are really like co-benefits or side benefits. They are not meant to be the purpose of the program or the reason why we give restrictions, I should say. The second topic or theme area is eligibility. And when we say eligibility here, we mean eligibility or your ability to petition for restrictions on the street, not eligibility to get permits, because obviously a block must apply for the program first. On the upper left-hand corner, you see how eligibility for the program has actually morphed over the years based on housing type. So currently, almost all single-family detached dwellings residents of those households are able to apply for the program, and then some attached households and some multifamily buildings are able to apply. But that has not been the case throughout the history of the program. Eligibility was, of course, a major issue in the 2005 review. And on the right-hand side here in green, you see 2 paraphrased comments that we received from the public that show some of the divergent opinion about how eligibility should work vis-a-vis housing type. About half of the residents who are in the program currently think that residents, regardless of housing type, should be able to get permits. And among those who are not in the program, that number is about 60%. So there's the people who are not in the program generally support the program being open to more types of housing than those in the program. I want to highlight for you a point here where support or attitudes about new, denser housing construction in a neighborhood change depending on who is allowed to park on street. We found that about half of all residents support new, denser housing in their neighborhood, but that support drops to about a quarter when the residents in that hypothetical new housing are able to park on street. And I'll point out again back here that about 40% of residents, when they said why they value RPP, said that they value it to discourage residents of apartments and condominiums from parking on their streets. The principle that we've arrived at here is that residents of all housing types should be eligible to petition, but not those approved by special exception. And by special exception here, we mean those approved through the site plan, UCMUD, URD petition process, or the form-based code. And the reason for that, or the reasons for coming to this principle, are that we do understand that the current petition eligibility requirements are seen by many as unfair, but that continuing to exclude buildings approved by the site plan and use permit process do reduce resident opposition to new housing, which is something that the county's Affordable Housing Master Plan, General Land Use Plan, and Housing Conservation District Program all seek to promote. They all promote us allowing for more housing to be built in this community. Excluding site plan and use permit buildings also works in concert with our reduced off-street parking policy for site plans in transit-rich areas approved in 2017. These two policies aim to allow for growth that attracts households with fewer cars. So if we allow buildings that have less parking, then we can attract households that have fewer cars. But of course, if we allow residents of those buildings more access to on-street parking, then it may be residents with many vehicles still continue to move in those buildings and just park on street. The third topic here is the number of permits and parking passes granted per household. Under the current program, almost all households have access to the same number of permits and passes. And one important thing to note is that when we ask residents about how they would approach managing parking demand, they seem to favor reducing parking caps over pricing them to manage demand through a more market-based approach. In other words, everyone having access to fewer passes was more popular than allowing those to simply pay for more. In our survey, also, we found that residents of almost every housing type there was always a group of people in every housing type that thought some other housing type should not be able to be part of the program. So you see here that residents, 1 in 5 residents of single-family homes and townhomes or duplexes said that apartment and condo dwellers should not get permits. And then on the other side, the residents of apartments and condos, a third of them, said that lower density houses with garages and driveways should not get permits, usually given different beliefs that we saw in an earlier slide about, well, if you have off-street parking, then you should not be needing to use the public street. The principle that we've arrived here is to tie permit caps per household to off-street parking availability. And we've reached this conclusion for a few reasons. One is that all housing types in our zoning ordinance have off-street parking requirements. And so we don't think that it's appropriate to say that just one type of housing should have all parking demand met off-street, and that others can continue to use on-street parking regardless amount of their off-street parking. This principle is also a compromise in our view between those different groups who think that some other group of residents should not be able to participate in the program or get permits. We believe that this kind of arrangement would also improve the program's equity by allowing more on-street permits to be given to those with less off-street parking. But I'll mention that there are a few different ways that we could go about implementing this, which you see in the bottom right-hand corner. One option could be to simply say, well, if you have any off-street parking, then there'll be a reduction in the maximum number of permits you can get. Or we could try to set up a one-for-one situation where the total budget or maximum number of permits available is reduced equal to the number of off-street spaces that we have. So we have some work to do, though, to figure out which kind of policy is most appropriate, and that'll be a subject of discussion with the public. Our fourth issue or theme area is parking for visitors and others. In the current program, in most cases, a person who wants to park on an RPP street must have a permit or pass from a resident during the hours of enforcement. We do have a few cases where we have RPP restrictions with a 2-hour exception where you can park up to 2 hours without a pass or permit, but that's rare. The enabling ordinance, our code, does allow for us to install meters on residential streets with permit exceptions, but that's not in place anywhere in the county presently. Pardon me. We have heard from some residents that they feel that it can be burdensome to work with the existing visitor pass regime. And we have heard some openness to opening up RPP streets to some limited amounts of non-resident parking. In the box on the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see that that support does depend on the group of people we're talking about. So residents are most likely to say that they're open to service providers or landlords and property managers parking on restricted streets, followed by school teachers and staff, and at the bottom are business patrons. I will also note that those who are in the program already were less likely to be open to non-residents parking on RPP restricted streets than those who are not in the program. And the challenge here is finding an efficient way to provide, if at all, non-resident off-street parking, because one easy to implement or one easy potential solution would be to simply allow the 2-hour exceptions everywhere, but that's kind of a divisive solution. Residents who are in the program do not support the 2-hour parking without permit, while those who do not live on RPP restricted streets are in favor of it. Also, police have brought up, I think, some very valid concerns about the additional difficulty with enforcing something like that, where a person could park without a permit for 2 hours. So with this in mind, the principle that we've arrived at is that we should find ways to make parking easier for household visitors, and we should explore if there are any easy to implement options for some limited non-resident parking. Obviously, we recognize that in this program, residents and their visitors have priority on RPP streets, and we think it's important to make visitor parking as easy as we can. We also do know that many streets with RPP restrictions could accommodate some additional parking. And again, the MTP encourages us to, maximize the efficiency of this on-street parking. But we do know that new permit classes and short-term parking will increase the cost to administer the program and make enforcement more difficult. Some options here could include actually putting in meters with exceptions for pass and permit holders, and some special permit classes for non-residents. But this is more to, I think, be explored through internal conversation and public engagement. Our fifth issue area here is enforcement. Enforcement was a frequent theme of discussion in our early rounds of engagement. Residents report that they see people or hear of people selling passes or photocopying passes and giving them to those for whom they're not intended. And while we have existing penalties for this activity that are actually quite severe, it is very hard for us to enforce them as staff. Also, while we do hear of enforcement being an issue, when we asked people if they had ever called for RPP enforcement, 77% of those in the RPP program said they had never actually called for enforcement on their streets. And when we gave people a trade-off between a program that's flexible or a program that's easy to enforce and simple to understand, slight majority said that they would prefer a program that remains flexible. We do know that the Flex Pass and visitor passes are easier to abuse than our decals. But when we asked residents about the possibility of reducing or simplifying the permit classes, only a quarter of residents said that they would be in favor of that in order to eliminate some abuse of the program. So actually, for this principle, we think what we need to do is go back and engage the public with a starker contrast or trade-off between program convenience and enforceability, because frequently what we hear is residents' desire for more frequent enforcement, but the frequency with which police personnel patrol and ticket for RPP violations or any violation is really outside of the scope of what we can do through the RPP program design. But the program's design itself can certainly improve or hinder enforcement. Obviously, improved enforcement can improve our demand of parking. It can make parking easier to find on the streets with restrictions. And while we want to be open to new technologies, we don't want to hang the hat of the whole program on new technologies. So we want to look at some solutions that are technology neutral. Our final principle here is program fees. The program fees pay for about 75% of the program cost. And again, while permit caps are more popular than pricing for managing demand, we did see some acceptance of permits varying according to the number of vehicles that a resident has in the program, as they currently do. Also, we did find that low-income residents reported being more price-sensitive than higher-income residents. So they were more likely to say, as you see in the right hand there, ability to pay should be a variable on which permits change in price. The principle that we've arrived at here is that fees should cover our program administration cost. And the reasons for this are this is a voluntary program. It will continue to exclude some of the public from using a public resource. But there are many pricing structures that could achieve the goal of meeting our costs. So we could have perhaps a low-income pass, or we could still have a tiered pricing program. There are multiple ways to get at that, and I think the question of what seems like a fair way to meet our costs will be a discussion point for the public. I'll point out here, though, that we are not taking ticket revenue into account with this, because we think it's important that ticket revenue is about compliance, and we don't want improved compliance to be a negative for our budgeting purposes. So those are our 6 principles, which you see here. In terms of next steps, we will take this framework and the framework with any modifications you asked for tonight out to the public again. We are preparing for 3 deliberative dialogues, 1 open house, and an online comment platform as a package of engagement activities. Dialogues, as we've discussed before, are highly structured, in-person, facilitated discussions where residents talk together about their preferences for the program. And I want to be clear here that in order to get a group of residents that are representative of the community, we're going to ask residents to apply to participate, and we're going to pull a group together from those who have applied that is diverse and represents the county. And anyone who is not able to join that will then, of course, be invited to our open house or to make comment online. We will then formulate a recommended policy, come to you with a request to authorize advertisement, present to commissions, and come to a final board vote, which we now see happening in the spring of 2020. Now, with that adoption, we will end the moratorium and accept petitions for new restrictions. But because we will likely be in the middle of our annual renewal period, we will not be changing all of the rules of the program. If there's any changes to fees or permit caps, if anything like that changes, that will not take effect until the following spring, so that there is not confusion about the renewal period for the 2020 to 21 program. With that, I will move directly to questions, comments, and guidance from the board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krim. Keeping in mind that there will be substantial community engagement on this, at this point, we should focus our comments to Mr. Krim on what would be helpful as he shapes these conversations within our community. But certainly, I don't want to abridge what questions you ask, but if you do have guidance, please be sure to get at it. Ms. Crystal.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the fulsome presentation. I wanted to make just one comment, and then I had a couple questions about the principles. With regard to the comment, I'm really excited about the deliberative dialogues model. I think on something as sticky as this issue, where there is no clear community consensus, and in fact, where folks' positions are very much tracked to where they live and what sort of experiences they've had, the idea of letting residents hear from one another who have opposing views really seems like the right way forward. And I just wanted to highlight something you were saying, Mr. Krim, in wrap up, that doesn't mean, although we believe this conversation could be best had or we could best learn from the small groups, that doesn't mean if you're not participating in those small groups, we won't hear from you or listen to your comments. So we do encourage people to comment as well, but wanted to commend that. So 2 questions about the principles, or at least one very specifically about the principle. With regard to Principle 6, that fees should cover program administration costs, does this mean that pricing would not be considered as a tool to manage demand? So that prices would only be set to cover administrative costs? They would not be considered as a way to perhaps incent people who have off-street parking to use their off-street parking instead?
It can be a bit of both, but I would say this is a question of like the approach that we take.
Right.
Obviously, when you raise prices on things, in theory, that can cause people to use the resource less or to consume less of it. So it could be that if we are trying to manage or cover our costs, that we will also encourage more efficient use of the curb. But our point here is simply to cover our costs. We did hear from some in the community that they wanted a more market-based approach, but looking at the existing occupancy that we see on the street and the level of extra effort that it would take to implement some sort of demand-based, even sort of responsive system, we thought that that was too much of an investment for what we would get out of the program.
Okay. That's helpful. So there may be kind of spillover effects of pricing to meet administrative costs, but that's not in terms of behavior, but that's not the intended.
Correct.
Okay. The other question is, there was a note under Principle 4 with the temporary visitors that our police prefer meters with a resident exception. I am incredibly intrigued by the idea of meters that have a resident exception, not only to this visitor issue, but thinking about, if our kind of core goal or the way this program's origin started, we're in preventing commuter parking, but there's a way to, allow visitors or balance other needs with the desire for longer term parking. Suffice it to say, I think that this could be a really interesting model worth exploring as a solution to some of these tensions. Is it possible to have a resident exception on the app, for example?
It is technically possible. Let me say that, and police, our representatives, police can certainly speak for themselves. I mean that in terms of they prefer it from an enforceability perspective or the ease,
Absolutely.
The efficiency of enforcing it. I want to be clear here, though, that we are not talking about putting in a resident exception up and down Wilson and Clarendon Boulevards, just so that everybody's aware of that. That remains, the focus there is on our mixed-use development. Our retail patrons are very short-term customers. And that is not meant to say that suddenly everybody who is a resident here with an RPP permit will be able to park free everywhere. However, yes, there are technological solutions here that don't necessarily involve meters, physical meters that could be put in place on residential streets where you could either have a pass or pay through an app or something like our Easy Park system.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say in the form of comments and then yield the floor, I think that's really intriguing. I really appreciate the caveat you raised, that this is not about letting nearby residents park for free in areas where we actually are using the metered parking as a way to manage demand for our commercial areas. But thinking about, is there some kind of meter-like strategy? To give a couple of examples, I think, was actually just hearing from somebody today where their child's daycare is adjacent to a neighborhood that has the RPP. What they really need is just the ability to park for 15, 30-minute drop-off if they could have that, through a meter type system, it may not actually affect the neighborhood interest. Similarly, I think about the neighborhood surrounding Virginia Hospital Center. I think one of the things we often hear what they're trying to do is, or the neighbors would like anyway, is to avoid the very long-term parking, right? Somebody who might be going to work and parking in that neighborhood for 8 or 10 hours, they may have, I haven't asked anybody, but they may have a greater tolerance for somebody who's coming in for a doctor's appointment or a temporary visit. So you definitely don't want to throw a monkey wrench into some of these issues that have been very carefully crafted to date. But that was a technological approach that I think I at least hadn't considered to date. And I can't help but think of its potential many applications.
Mr. Gutschall.
Thank you. I actually was just curious in the principles that you've outlined how in neighborhoods that surround schools, how the use of on-street parking to meet the needs of schools, like school faculty and staff and parents who are coming to visit the school, how that works into the principles that you've outlined.
So I think that is in this larger topic of Principle 4 about potentially special permits, because it is essentially a commuter. It would require a special permit type because we would not put out likely like even if we were to have meters with resident exception, we wouldn't have like a 12-hour period there if the point is to limit the day-long parking. That would require some sort of special permit. And of course, the trade-off again is creating a special permit class increases program complexity. But we do see the most acceptance of any group who doesn't own the property or isn't working on the property. The most resident acceptance for some sort of commuter group is for school teachers and staff. And I'll note that in our survey work, we did not find that support changed in relation to distance from a school. So it's not like, oh, people far away from schools like the idea, but people right by the schools don't like them as much, don't like that idea as much. It also didn't depend on whether or not somebody had children in the household, because those were two interesting questions that we wanted to probe on.
Excellent, thank you.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you. I really, as I've said before to you, the approach using principles is just great. And we've been talking about this for quite a while. And I have come away almost every time like thinking, oh, there's something I don't quite get there. I mean, it is very complex, very confusing. You have really boiled it down. Repetition might help, but I actually think you've really got it now. So it's very clear what the point is, what the issues are, how we got here, how we're proposing to move forward. And I think this is something that the community can really chew on. Thank you very much. And I think I'll leave it at that. I mean, it was so clear. Mr. Dorsey and I were at a meeting with 140 people over this issue at one point. 70 people were really angry on one side and 70 people were really angry on the other. And it was just so clear the kind of divisions and things we're trying to work out here. But I think this is a really good kind of way forward and appreciate it. Look forward to continuing to work on it and hear what comes back. Thank you so much. As I say, I think this is at a point where people can understand it and can. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you for thoroughness and the whole approach. I want to dig into it, but I want brevity now, just in light of where we are in the agenda. But thank you so much.
And I don't thank you at all. I think this is really a waste. I'm kidding. Great work, comprehensive work. As you continue consider these deliberative dialogues, I would encourage you to think, and it's not really a recommendation, but just something for you to chew over as a team to really represent what's going on elsewhere in the country as communities deal with this issue. This is a case where Arlington was, of course, first because of the Supreme Court decision, but across our country, people are dealing with the implementation of a lot of these policies and principles in very different ways. And not that I would necessarily look at any other community as a model, but just for the purpose of maybe engendering some empathy and some quality deliberation. Maybe it would be helpful to have stakeholders expand the scope of what is possible, what is being done, so that they can, really think about these principled issues. Because I certainly agree with the conclusions that you've reached with a lot of this, depending on where people sit, having had RPP or trying to access areas with RPP that can very much, give you a tunnel vision, and perhaps expanding the vision will lead for some good quality dialogue. So thank you again. Look forward to deliberating on this next spring. It's going to be a doozy.
Great. I just want to remind everybody, because in the interest of getting to your comments, I skipped over this slide, but this presentation has been up on the board agenda website for about a week now. We sent out notice to the project listserv, so it's available in English, Spanish, and Amharic. We will now put a link to it on the project page, but this slide presentation will be available. There's also, of course, our entire library of summaries that went into all the bits that were in this presentation there as well.
Folks want to spend more time with those clever little avatars. That's where they can find it.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
That concludes my presentation.
It really does. All right, thank you, Mr. Schwartz, and to everyone who presented as part of the manager's report today. We're now ready to move into a closed meeting, so I move that the county board convene a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Sections 2.2, 3711A3, 7, and 8 for the following purposes: discussion of 5 matters involving the acquisition of real property for public purposes, where in each instance discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the county's negotiating strategy and bargaining position. Consultation with the county attorney and necessary staff concerning the legal bases for the approval of density and height through the special exception process for property zone CO Crystal City, including granting bonus density and height and any limitations that may exist based upon the provisions of the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan, sector plans, and other land use plans and policies of the county board. Consultation with the county attorney concerning the terms and conditions of an agreement with the city of Alexandria for maintenance of bridges connecting the city and the county, and consultation with the county attorney concerning case number CL 19-1081 pending in the Circuit Court of Arlington County. Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are now in closed session. For those interested in when we will convene this evening, we will certainly not convene. We are planned to convene at 6:30, but there might be a likelihood that we're a little bit later than that. We'll do our best to get back as close to 6:30 as possible.
We might need some peacekeepers too.